Hi, welcome to the first episode of the Böll Europe podcast series on elections in 2025. My name is Joan Lanfranco, and I'm the head of communications and outreach at the EU office of the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, the German Green Political Foundation. Check out our work on our website, eu.böll.org, and on the show notes. After a busy 2024 super election year, we keep looking at elections taking place in 2025 with the help of our colleagues and partners around the globe. Who's winning? Who's losing? And what's at stake for the EU and the global order? Subscribe to our channel to receive notifications of new episodes. Today, we'll focus on Kosovo. Parliamentary elections took place in Kosovo on 9 February. The EU's High Representative, Kaja Kallas, said that the elections were peaceful, competitive, and with participation of all communities. She also said that a new electoral law was implemented, that the campaign was vibrant, and that the process showed resilience and commitment to democratic principles. So we want to discuss this statement and the election results as a whole with one of our colleagues in the field, Granit Gashi. Granit is an environmentalist and sustainability pioneer in Kosovo. He has worked for civil society organizations such as Gaia Kosovo, BirdLife Serbia, and he's also the co-founder of the Foundation for Animal Rights in Kosovo. Granit works as program assistant and Kosovo contact point at the Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung's Belgrade office, which also covers Serbia, Montenegro, and Kosovo. Thanks, Granit, for joining us today.
Much obliged. Thank you for having me.
Do you have a similar reading as the EU's High Representative? What would you say are the key takeaways from the election results?
That's my similar sentiment I would share with the EU's High Representative's comments on the latest elections in Kosovo. I would draw also probably a bit of tension on the polarizing language, which has been sort of exacerbated by the, I would say, parties, but one can pick up and should pick up the one in charge, who is Vetëvendosje, especially towards the other parties, but also towards certain media outlets. Kosovo, who are seen to be more critical, so to say, towards the leading party, which also resulted to win this election, but also has been ruling the country for the past 4 years, which is the leftist self-determination movement party called Vetëvendosje.
One of the takeaways is that the ruling party lost a bit of percentage, right?
Vetëvendosje loss of its previous held majority, which was counting to 51. So it was a landslide victory. Vetëvendosje again won 41%, which shows that people practically want still them to be the one in charge. However, they also, I would say, backfired on the lack of results which Vetëvendosje managed to bring to the table, practically compared to what they have been running the previous election, which was a harsh stance against corruptions, which is not to say that they didn't do anything, but not to the extent that they held themselves. So one can deduce practically that this was also a slap to them on this regard, but also to the other one, which is practically Kurti's government confrontational, let's say, way of dealing, especially with allies, Kosovo allies, which is the West and US. Yeah.
And does it mean that they have to look for partners to form a majority now? And would be the preferred partner, at least what is being discussed?
That's the issue, which I can draw practically again your attention to the polarizing language that Vetëvendosje used. Also other parties, but Vetëvendosje was the kind of the bigger one, being the small one in the room in that sense. So far, we have two of the main opposition parties out of three who came out and declared that they will not practically create a coalition with Vetëvendosje. We have now only one party who still didn't declare anything, but then many members of its own are giving hints that Vetëvendosje is not the one party to be dealt with, especially knowing that in previous times Vetëvendosje showed very little consensus building approach towards collaborating with other political parties, and again shows Kurtis very much lack of reluctance to be governing practically in two modes. He wants Vedenosi actually wants to push forward the entire reform that they put forward practically only by themselves, and shows their lack of political ability to create allegiances, alliances internally, but also externally, as it was shown for the last 4 years.
And when you say polarization, is it comparable to some what's happening in many EU countries where you have a lot of right and far right and reactionary parties? Is that also the case in the new Kosovo landscape after the elections? Do you have a representation of these parties?
It's not to that level, luckily. So obviously, Kosovo is also affected by this wave of right wingism in the European Union, but also coming from US, which is and it's not flying under our radar. This time we had, for the first time, practically a anti-gender political party articulation coming forward and running for the elections. Luckily, they didn't pass the threshold, which is good news and shows that people in Kosovo also kind of don't see a religious, so to say, agenda within the political one. Nonetheless, the creation of this political party also gave a frame, I would say, for the entire political spectrum, who kind of, through the polarized language used to accuse one another, kind of shifted to populism more. And this was led by Vedendosje mainly, but also by right-wing parties in Kosovo, especially in regards to, let's say, reproduction rights or gender democratic reforms that the political party wanted to push as the civil code, which would regulate the same-sex marriage in Kosovo, and which was also a promise of this government, especially towards its German partners, for which actually it failed to deliver. So the entire political spectrum has shifted more on the right, kind of leaning towards populism, to easy solutions, to absolutism as a way of governing, and to practically push any rhetoric into this, the thought of the masses, not comprising the one on logic, which tends to push the entire political discourse normally into a witch finding quest, so to say.
Right. And on the side of green transformation, so it's not easy for green parties, but was there any chance, or these ideas are more integrated in the ruling party? So how would you describe the chance for the green agenda in Kosovo?
I mean, it started with this party, the biggest green transformation, or at least following of the green agenda, because Western Balkan countries also are signatory of this obligation statement, which was done in collaboration with EU and 6 Western Balkan states. Kosovo is amongst them, so we're obliged practically to respect the objectives of the green agenda by 2050 to reach decarbonization. After many years of trying to put a new coal power plant practically, which is our biggest concern when it comes to decarbonization efforts that we're running, Vedendosje actually posed a new energy strategy which puts decarbonization into rails. The current strategy is seen as a very radical one now, because it doesn't include any fossil, as it's called, transitional fossils within the agenda. So it aims directly to decarbonization. This didn't go really well with geostrategic US interest on its attempt to gasify practically the region through these pipelines coming from Azerbaijan and Turkey. However, somehow the government managed to bypass this pressure not to practically put gas as a transitional fossil, knowing that we're 90% relying on coal power plants as our main energy generator supplier in the country. So in that regard, Vedendosje did, in my understanding, did really well, and it was very challenging for them to put this entire strategy, 10-year strategy, which they pushed forward, into place. On the other side, during this last campaign, we heard the second or the third biggest political party, Kosovo, talk again about a possible idea of investing around 500 million euros into a gas pipeline coming from northern Macedonia to Kosovo, which is part of this huge network of gas coming from Azerbaijan to Kosovo, which also it's a geostrategic, so it's not just green agenda sort of European way of thinking on decarbonization, but it's also something that requires Kosovo to think about its own allies and its own position towards them, especially the big ones as US is to Kosovo. So I don't know if this is going to come forward as a change by the supposed new government, which might comprise of having the entire three parties of the opposition, which they do, by the way, have the numbers. But then this practically is something that we have to see what's in the future.
How long can it take in Kosovo to form a government?
We're not that good on that. So it's like a hard thing to balance, I would say, and think about. I mean, this is the first time that we had a government for 4 years, actually, and it didn't collapse, and that is because the ruling party with the dossier ran on its own, and it had its own numbers. Prior to that, we always had coalitions, which shows a really nice, I would say, democratic process and like a lower tendency of absolutism of any political party in Kosovo. So like it keeps them humble, but also it keeps them very unstable. Because you have to make compromises, and then normally if you have three political parties, everyone thinking that each of them are the kingmaker, then you're going always to have people who will regress on a promise that they held previously and then kind of collapse the government, and then requiring that the government, the entire state goes into the election. So that's the hardship that is posed currently to the opposition. Opposition most likely is now trying to convince deputies from other political parties to join them, or certain political parties to join them. But then, having said that, two of them already declared that they won't practically run the government with the Vendosi. It's very hard for them to reach the numbers. On the other side, we don't have time to wait. We have a EU which is more united, but it seems still to be very scattered on many different angles, having a very unpredicted US doom, almost so to say, on us as a continent, and then having Russia on the other side being very active on Ukraine and actually kind of showing minor success, but still success on the battlefield. That's going to be, and then having the Polish state now running the presidency, it's going to be really hard to convince them, first of all, to lift the sanctions which they posed towards Kosovo, and then also try to mitigate the current not so nice relations that Kurti managed to have with the Biden administration. The Trump administration came out publicly practically to call Kurti the one which is not to be trusted by the partners. So Kurti and Grenell, Richard Grenell, if you remember the envoy who was said to be the one in Germany, and then was ousted, and then the Trump first elected period, he served in Kosovo as a special envoy to kind of bring a peace deal. He then came to be the one to be accused on land swapping ideas that Trump administration brought to the table between Kosovo and Serbia, which then were ousted by the European Union. However, he came back again with Trump, and obviously he's not going to be so friendly towards Kurti. He actually made tweets before the election, kind of stating the American position, which is hostile to Kurti, trying to, practically interfere with the elections in Kosovo in that sense to, he can convince citizens not to vote for him, which was widely used by political opponents and media, saying that, you're betraying our main partner, hence people should not vote you because practically you're undermining our position in the international arena. When it comes to EU, everything is boiled down to the dialogue with Serbia, which is on stall. So now having the new Trump administration and the scattered Europe, it's going to be weird. Some are seeing positive notes, especially on EU representatives, the facilitators, the new facilitator for the dialogue, who is seen to be way much more informed than the previous ones. At least this is the commentary from the leading party, Vetvendosi, who I think likes the new one. And also the EU High Representative, again, is seen as a positive approach. But then with all these big geostrategic shifts in which bigger guys, so to say, are trying to pull out the strings of the institutions that we barely managed to create, is going to be really tough on small states as Kosovo, especially in the sense that there is no real economic offer that the states makes towards this its own allies, namely EU or US. So it's like a really hard task for Kosovo in this one to navigate on even convincing EU member states on its own right and on EU's power actually to remain as a facilitator, but also to convince the US administration to bring its own support, or at least remain with the same support, especially knowing that US is pushing EU to take care more on its military spendings and threatening that it's going to reduce its own footprint in Europe, and that means that Kosovo, being under the protection of KFOR, is going to be highly affected. So it's really hard to say practically what is the future is going to look like, but obviously it's very unstable, and one can expect many surprises, especially having so many right-wingers around the Western Balkans and also Europe cheer to the US administration, their tendency to practically come back to power, and then one can assume what that brings to a small state, a peripheric state as Kosovo. So times are dire, so to say, and one cannot expect nothing under big challenge.
Indeed. Yeah, Kosovo is not spared of everything that's going on globally. And actually, I wanted to ask you lastly about relations with Serbia, because also there, well, there's a bit of political turmoil lately, a lot of demonstrations. So do you think something will change after Kosovo's election in terms of relations with Serbia, or rather not?
It depends. I think everything is then like in that stance. I don't expect. I expect if the elections taking place in Serbia with the dissolution of the government, most likely are going to postpone the stall of the dialogue itself, which is the only window that EU and US are communicating to Kosovo, practically the entire international order. Adding to that, the reluctances of having a new government in Kosovo in the 2-3 months to come. This, I think, kind of makes a clear projection to us that most likely until summer, we're going to just be remaining on standstill on both sides. And then even if the both governments will be created, I don't know what the opposition will be in Serbia, or it might be that again SNS, Vučić's party, will again lead a governing coalition in Serbia. We might be having a quicker probably jump to the dialogue. If not, if the opposition wins in Serbia, with the current numbers as it's are shown, I don't know if that is going to represent a further postponement of the dialogue process or a continuation of it. One can say that we lost so much time. Kurti lost so much time with its own actions, trying to put sovereignty, acting unilaterally on that regard without the coordination with our allies, and he being penalized over it really kind of ate a lot of precious time from Kosovo and ate a lot of its own chances to actually increase its own subjectivity, internationally speaking, by confronting its own partners. So with this, it looks kind of bleak, to be frank, and I will conclude because I'm stretching into too many directions. But let's see. We're going to have time, but then I think all eyes are on US and China and EU. I think it's safe to say that only Latin America is somehow left aside from this. Africa mainly. Not even that. It's
a bit pouring everywhere. Yes.
Yeah, it's pouring everywhere, and times are there.
Well, thanks a lot, Granit, for your insights. It's been extremely useful, and I think we'll be following closely what happens in Kosovo. And thanks a lot for your time.
Yeah, thank you. I hope this brings any useful information to anyone who is listening to your podcast. And again, thank you for the time and focus brought here in this corner of Europe. So thank you.
Pleasure. You've listened to the first episode of the Böll Europe podcast series on elections in 2025. You can find more information about our work on the Western Balkans on the show notes and on our website eu.böll.org. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with your friends and colleagues. Until the next episode, goodbye!